Hello, everybody, and welcome to Airway Answers, expanding your breadth of knowledge. I need to repeat that again, expanding your breadth of knowledge. We have Dr. Raphael here, and
I
you will
love
understand.
that, by the way.
Yes, you
What
get
a great logo. That is so clever.
Okay, so little background of how that came about. It was my
Yeah.
birthday. My husband and I go out to dinner with my parents, and I'm obsessed with trying to find a name for this new podcast. And I have all these options, and it's like all I'm talking about at dinner. And they got so annoyed at me. My mom turned to my husband and she's like, "Is she always this annoying?" Because I was so persistent. So I'm like, I want something with expanding and breathing and expanding, because we're all, growing the jaws, expanding
Hmm.
your knowledge, but also breathing. And the next day, my dad called me and he goes, "What about expanding your breadth of knowledge?" I was like, "Dad, you did."
Perfect.
So shout out to my dad. There we
Dad,
go.
you got it.
But
See
yeah, so
now in my part of the world, I have to hear everybody complaining about Barry in the world of mouth breathing. That's what my family says about me for years now.
It's all
I
we
know.
talk about. We love,
Uh,
love all this airway. Yeah. So I
uh,
figure with this podcast series, which is actually YouTube and we see the video, it's not, you can listen to it on Airway Circle Radio, but I feel
mhm.
like it's best because they're mostly slides and when we see the interactions, but we're, I'm talking with multiple practitioners in all areas of the field, helping people expand their knowledge and find answers to all of our airway problems that humans are all pretty much all suffering from. So that's
Mhm.
kind of where the title came from. And of
Well,
course,
good, because I have both answers and plenty of problems.
oh, great. Don't we all?
You'll be able
You
to
have more
share them
answers than
all.
I do. We all have airway problems. We each person has different answers to all these problems that we have. So I'm
Yeah.
so excited to have you on the show today.
All right. Thank you, Nicole.
And I do pronounce your name correctly, Dr. Barry Raphael.
Raphael. Mm-hmm.
And let me give a little bio about you, and then we'll talk about what we're going to go over today. So, Dr. Raphael has been a specialist in orthodontics since 1983, but had a change of heart and mind in 2008 when he learned that soft tissue dysfunction is the
The
cause
cause of
of
malocclusion.
malocclusion. Let me repeat, soft
Mm-hmm.
tissue dysfunction is the cause of malocclusion.
Yeah.
That
That
time,
that comes, by the way, that comes from Herman Ramirez writing an article about Myobrace, and it came at a time when I was just at the chair struggling with a lateral tongue thrust that kept me from finishing off a case. And maybe I had three that week. My dad used to say these things come in threes.
Mhm.
And I sat down and read this article in the Ortho Tribune, and he said that, and I go, I know about tongue thrusting, I know about thumb sucking, but to think that all malocclusions are related to soft tissue dysfunction, I wasn't sure. But the thought reverberated in my head for a good 4 or 5 months. And then suddenly I understood. And it's the kind of thing that the more you look for it, you see it right there in front of your eyes. And once you see it, you can't unsee it anymore. And it's led me to go ahead and finish your introduction,
No,
and
this
we'll
is great.
talk
And
more.
you mentioned Dr. Herman Ramirez, and he
Yeah.
was a mentor to my mentor, Katha Fair, who worked in San Diego for 40 some years. And that was her premise. And she always talked about Dr.
Uh,
Herman Ramirez. And so that connection with soft tissue dysfunction,
yeah.
malocclusion, breathing, airway. Okay, so let me say a little bit more about Dr. Raphael. Since that time, he has included helping children and adults achieve an optimal physiologic airway and breathing pattern as a
And that's
primary goal.
from the ADA, mind you, right? You know
Okay.
that? That's
Yeah,
the ADA policy statement on
2007.
the role of the dentist in sleep disordered breathing. I have taken that phrase as my mantra.
Love that. Yep.
Yeah.
Achieve an optimal physiologic airway and breathing pattern as a
Yeah.
primary goal of treatment with straighten the teeth as secondary icing on the cake.
Mm.
We're never going to get through a bio because I keep having to think, we keep
Oh no,
because I
that's
just thought of
sorry.
something else. I love that. Is there a phrase, and I might be kind of silly if this is already a thing, but airway occlusion and cosmetic occlusion? Do people say your airway occlusion? Or did I make that up? Because
Well,
it'd be really cool if I made that up. I was thinking
well,
the other day as I was driving, the patient's airway, we want to put them in a good airway occlusion, not just cosmetic occlusion.
yeah, I haven't said it that way, but it does make sense. I mean, there is a yin and the yang to the universe, right? And there is always two sides to every coin, on and on. And I think that the health-oriented aspects of orthodontics and dentistry are one half of that coin. And then, of course, the aesthetic side of the pretty smile and all the kinds of things that orthodontists usually sell themselves on is the other side of the coin.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it's there's some really challenging situations around that, because there are times when, say, an orthodontist has set up a beautiful occlusion, straight teeth, and everybody loves the way the teeth look, but from a health point of view, it may not necessarily be in balance with the rest of the body.
That was me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
And then what?
right.
Then do you take the teeth out of that pretty occlusion and you put them in balance with the rest of the body, for instance, providing more tongue space and getting the tongue out of the back of the throat and that kind of stuff. But now the teeth look really wonky.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and there are ways of
You making
compensating
fun of my
that.
diastema? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
The teeth look wonky. Well, when I had a consultation with Dr. Hang when I was starting my orthodontic journey as an adult, and
Yeah.
he said if your orthodontist looked at your teeth, he would give himself a big pat on the back
Yeah.
because of how beautiful your teeth were, because they were so perfectly straight and lined up. He goes, but
Yep.
too bad he didn't pay attention to the body connected to the teeth. And that
That's right.
phrasing really stuck with me because I had significant class 2 malocclusion. I was just given a headgear
Yeah.
and there was no expansion or anything like that. And then as an adult, come to realize, oh, okay, I have a lot of breathing issues
Yeah.
and sleep fragmentation issues. And wow, my palate is so narrow and nobody even thought to expand. My lower jaw is locked behind my upper jaw where I can physically feel my tongue is just crammed into my throat.
Right.
So hopefully, that's one of the reasons we're here is there is this change in the field. So let me
Yeah.
talk about your.
Well, one of the problems there for orthodontists in particular is that they hew to the standard of the angle classification as both a diagnostic and treatment goal, construct. And it is true that in humans that grew up with straight teeth, that the teeth would generally arrange themselves in a class 1 so-called normal occlusion. That is, the way teeth are supposed to come in when the face grows properly, when the jaw grows properly, when a person's able to breathe properly, and all that is class 1.
Mhm,
And Angle defined that as such, over 100 years ago, and said that if teeth weren't like that in a person, that they should be made to be like that.
mhm,
But the problem is that when the teeth are not like that, it's not just the teeth that are rearranged.
mhm,
As you know, it's the way the face has grown that has created, well, the way the face has grown, and also the soft tissue dysfunction that surrounds the teeth and so forth, that have led the teeth into those malpositions.
mhm,
And just correcting the teeth into a class 1 occlusion does not correct all those other things.
mhm. I
And but
remember I
yet,
heard once I
but this
heard,
is the way I was taught as an
yeah,
orthodontist.
yeah.
You look at the teeth. If they're class 2, you want to make them class 1. If they're class 3, you want to make them class 1. But whether or not they fit the rest of the body is not really considered.
Mm-hmm. I remember
I
hearing in a
know.
lecture, Dr. Derek Mahoney said it's like
Mm-hmm.
rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. I
Yeah.
love that, right? I mean,
Yeah, that's
wow, quite
right.
a visual.
Right.
Let me finish just talking about where your office is, because you are in
Mm.
Clifton, New Jersey, the
Yeah.
Raphael Center for Integrative Orthodontics that you've had since 2014.
Yeah.
And now over 80% of the people that come to see you and your team for airway growth and development, overall wellness, those are their primary goals for themselves, is not straight teeth necessarily as a primary goal, but the airway growth and overall wellness. And your team includes a myofunctional therapist, a craniosacral therapist, a functional physician, a nutritionist, and a team of Myobrace Health coaches to teach your patients how to maximize their oral and overall health. So you're a great person to talk.
We really could spend the whole hour on that introduction. I think let's go back because, all right, so my office is just 11 miles west of Manhattan, 4 miles west of Giant Jet Stadium. And so I'm in the metropolitan area pretty much. And I had been there for 27 years as an orthodontist, and I really enjoyed orthodontics. Not that I didn't like it. Went into practice with my dad and all that before I read that article. Once I read that article by Herman and then started seeing things differently. It took a little while for me to really get that I needed to change, the way I was doing things. But in 2014 is when I really said, I am going to make a commitment to this. And when I put up a new sign and a new logo and called myself the Center for Integrative Orthodontics, that was like, how do I say it? I put that ball and chain on my leg, but intentionally knowing that I couldn't go back. Because for those of you that may, just be getting into this or deciding whether you should tread into this area or not, there will be times when you wish you hadn't, because orthodontics itself is far easier to do when you're in control, when you're going to be working towards, these standards that are by caveat and agreement, the standard of care. When you let go of that, things become harder. I mean, now instead of working towards a goal of perfection, which most of us in dentistry are trained to do. I mean, even from dental school, everything has to be just so. The apical fill has to be right. The margin of the crown has to be perfect. Otherwise you don't get out of school. Well, now we're working with behavior. And so we're going to get a bell curve of results. This is a little bit more like, say, being a teacher or a piano instructor or a dance coach or a football coach. You're not going to get perfection every time. Maybe I do a little bit better than baseball players that hit only 1/3 of the time. But you have to expect a bell curve. And my goals are no longer perfection, but to help someone become better than they otherwise would have been. Right. So, and, there are other culturally accepted things. Like, you don't go to a physician and say, make me perfect. You go to a physician, albeit one who gives you pills or surgery or anything, but they never expect perfection. They say, we're going to make you better. And as long as you reduce your symptoms and all that, you figure you're okay. In this line of work, I don't have the angle classification to hang my hat on. I mean, it's nice. Like I say, it's the icing on the cake. But the things that I'm working towards are more like the quantitative and some qualitative measures of the medical necessity for treatment, right? How well do you breathe during the day? How well do you sleep at night? Are you suffering from comorbidities of not being able to sleep well? What's your end-tidal carbon dioxide? What's your sleep quotient index? How do you score on this sleep disturbance inventory? Things like that. And nobody's going to get perfect. Everybody's hopefully they're going to get better and well enough so that they have an optimal physiologic airway and breathing pattern. But it's kind of fuzzy. When you think about it, it is not easy work.
Mhm.
So to me, that was a landmark time when I said, okay, I'm committing.
Yeah, you put the
And
sign up, you can't go
I,
back.
right. Yeah. And I don't want to be false. It's no come on. It's no false. Not that I have any of the answers, but I made that commitment. And most of the time I'm very happy that I did.
Yeah.
There are times when I didn't move the bell, that much, the curve that much.
Well, I feel like
And
that,
there are times when I think we still don't have all the answers that we need to solve these critical problems for kids.
yeah.
It's not all just airway, mind you. There are all
Hmm.
kinds of things that are going on in the body,
Hmm.
struggling in this modern environment that we still haven't figured out yet, or at
Hmm.
least I haven't figured out.
Hmm.
So if anybody out there has some answers,
Chime
be
in.
on, yeah, be on Nicole's next episode.
Yeah. And I think also you made that commitment, but you can't not. Once you know this information, you cannot look at any human being without seeing the dysfunctions, seeing these issues. So when
Yeah.
you're in an orthodontic practice, how can you not see it once you've already learned about the breathing issues, the sleep issues, tongue posture, scallop,
Yeah.
all those components. And that's why when I saw your presentation once, the tongue and the orthodontist, a troubled love story, that had
Hmm.
such a strong impact on me. So I know you're going to share some of that today.
Yeah, we can
One
talk about it.
thing, yeah, let's talk about that. But one thing I want to ask is, do you feel every orthodontic case has an underlying soft tissue dysfunction?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
There are a couple things like there are people with supernumerary teeth, congenitally missing teeth that were lost from decay, or that kind of thing. So those are extraneous, but I'm not extraneous. They count, but they may not have a soft tissue component.
Right. Okay.
But if you connect the dots back, like why do teeth get lost? What's going on with the genetic expression of tooth size, shape, number, and form, and all that? So I don't know. But what I understood was that when there are crooked teeth, the only reason that they're crooked is that there was some aberration in the growth of the underlying skeleton, and that soft tissue compensations
Mm-hmm.
are either the origin of the skeletal deformation, oftentimes, or they are compensating for the skeletal deformation, and often in that form and function spiral that can either be going downhill towards more deformation and more dysfunction, or it can be going uphill if we can change the initial conditions.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, I certainly rarely see kids that don't have soft tissue dysfunction.
Mm-hmm.
Once in a while, I do. I had a brother and sister this week whose faces I looked at and I said, you know what, I can see the craniofacial dystrophy, but when I took a closer look, they were breathing through their nose, the nasal aperture, the nasal capsule, the top of the pharynx, the bottom of the pharynx. There really was no obstruction. They were breathing calmly through their nose. They were sleeping well. Their swallow was quiet. I didn't see a lot of motion in the facial muscles during swallow, and the teeth were really not that crooked. And I said to the mom, who is one of these moms now that it's well educated and wants to make sure that their kids are going to grow up healthy. She came to me, so, oh, their palates are so narrow that, I want to make sure that they grow up okay. I said to her, well, I think they're doing okay. They have good function, and as long as they keep breathing through their nose, as long as they are sleeping well, and they're doing well. They were both, alert and funny kids, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not looking for trouble.
Yeah,
I think they're all right. By
probably
the way,
sure.
I feel the same way about tongue tie.
Mm-hmm.
That you know, a lot of us get up in not up in arms, but we, you know, we're anxiously looking for that fascial restraint under the tongue and want to get it done, you know, as soon as we see it. But I want to be a little more certain that it's actually causing functional problems.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I want to make sure that it's, you know, well trained and the muscles can handle before and then after and help it heal well and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess maybe I'm just, you know, looking at a little more nuance than I was in the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
not just taking the signs as necessarily a problem unless they really are a problem.
Right. And I work with a lot of adults who may get diagnosed with a tongue tie, at my assessment.
Mm,
However, that's one of the most significant contributing factors to a myofunctional disorder from a myofunctional perspective, because that
yeah,
tissue develops, in utero, and that can contribute to that low tongue posture from in utero, right, throughout
right.
childhood. However, and then that can contribute to the malocclusion, narrow palate, et cetera, et
Agreed.
cetera. But as an adult, that's sometimes the last thing we treat. It's not the first thing we treat, even though that might have been the primary cause, because
Yeah,
now we need to treat the tongue space issue, get the palate expanded so the tongue would fit. Now we have to treat breathing, body posture. So I think it's not good when a lot of people just jump to the tongue tie component because they
right.
see it. So sometimes it's might be the first factor, but it might be the last factor that we treat.
Yeah, that's a good point. And because certainly the tongue has to be part of the growth process of the maxilla. It is the scaffold over which that bone forms. And then once the jaw collapses enough, there's not really often not even space for it to fit. So you're right. You have to do the 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 structural work first,
Mm-hmm.
and then. But do you ever get to a point where, let's say, you've done that and some of the symptoms may be relieved and you decide to just watch the tongue tie, or do you try to help someone compensate? Like as an SLP, you do a lot of working with articulation. You do teach a lot of compensation for, you know, at least historically. You know, you try to help someone say an S using sibilants when they using the equipment, if you will, the equipment that they've got.
Mm. Well, we try to avoid compensation. So once I learned about the whole myofunctional therapy component and
Ah,
tongue tie, then we learn it's atypical to produce an S or a Z with your tongue tipped down. And that's actually a compensatory strategy. So instead of
right.
teaching compensations, we want to teach correct functioning and correct rest
Ah,
posture without the need to compensate. Um, so the tongue tie or a tongue tie release is just a means to an end goal. It's not the goal. The goal is correct oral rest posture. So even
right.
though we might observe that there's a lingual restriction in the assessment, it doesn't mean it's going to need to be released. So we do, at least in my practice, we do at least a month of myofunctional therapy. And then we check how is the tongue resting subconsciously in the correct position with the front, the middle, and the back of the tongue gently suctioned to the palate after
Mm,
we strengthen the muscles. And if the patient's a good patient, they practice their exercises daily,
yeah.
um, that should happen without them thinking about it subconsciously. But if they still have to be moving their tongue up, then we know that diagnosed lingual restriction is something that's going to need to be addressed. That's how we look at that. So it doesn't mean that because we see there's a tongue tie, it's going to have to be released. It's really about our end goal and achieving that goal, and any factors that get in the way of that will need to be addressed.
Yeah.
Whether there's nasal breathing component, allergies. Our goal, we just keep that focus as correct oral rest posture, good chewing and swallowing of foods, liquids, saliva, eliminating any noxious oral habits that would impact those goals. And then we look at all the factors that might play a role in that.
Yeah.
Look at the medical system, the dental system, the myofunctional
Yeah.
system. I did
Well,
have an orthodontist that I was talking to who said that genetics, I don't know who the person who is strongly a believer in genetics as the factor, somebody who he learned about an orthodontic training or whatever. There's like different camps.
Yeah.
And he said, no, it's genetics. Like it was crazy that I was saying that there could be epigenetic and soft tissue factors and whatever. So what would you say, like you would say to somebody who with a strong
Yeah, boy, that is such that I would say that that is probably another one of those orthodoxies, another one of those intellectual constructs that stands in the way of orthodontists coming aboard to see that things are very different. And look, I really think that the modern literature and research, especially in cellular research, is pretty clear that no cell acts on its own as an independent structure, that its relationship with the environment and the communication between the outside of the cell and the inside of the cell are constant, ongoing, and influence everything that happens within the cell.
Mm-hmm.
And I know this was a controversial concept maybe I don't know 20 or 30 years ago, like when Gilbert Ling started talking about this, but I think the research has been coming around showing that the ion pump aspect of the cell membrane being like this case that kept it's not like that. There is a constant communication, both biochemical and energetic, between the outside environment and the inside of the cell. And frankly, I don't even think that we think that the nucleus and the DNA are the brain of the cell anymore. The DNA essentially is like a hard drive where we store information, and it's only the input from the environment that decides not only which genes get expressed, but which ones don't get expressed. Genes are constantly being turned on, turned off, recombined, and the output of proteins from the nucleus has almost everything to do with the input that came into the cell.
Mm-hmm.
So if you just extrapolate that from the cellular to tissue to organ to system to body, to think that our bodies exist without input from the rest of the environment is ridiculous. I can't even. How do you even just on that basis alone say that? And how does a tooth know to come in rotated 45 degrees? There's no way that is a genetic construct. You can't say that.
Yeah.
And you know what? This evidence has been in front of our eyes for a long time, and a lot of us now, we talk about those experiments by Egil Harvold with the monkeys where they plugged up the noses, right? And that was about the time I was in my program, and I remember reading it, and I remember going, yeah, that's interesting, but it really can't be, because every one of the monkeys developed a different kind of malocclusion. Right? How could one cause create all malocclusions when all malocclusions come from a different genetic construct?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is they do, because they're not genetic.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the malocclusions that developed in the monkeys that had their noses plugged up were not genetic at all. It was 100%.
Yeah.
Based on how their physiology reacted to this drastic change in function.
Right. It's even more important, the fact that not that they had the structural changes, but how they were different. They all developed different.
That's exactly right.
That's fascinating.
How does that happen? That happens because the compensations that every animal adopted were serendipitous. They were just kind of whatever they could figure out at the moment to survive. Yeah. And we know that one of them didn't survive. One of them suffocated.
Yeah.
Which is why we can't do this experimentation anymore. It every animal kind of adopted instant survival mechanism for being able to breathe through the mouth, holding the mouth open, putting the tongue out, putting the tongue to the side, putting whatever it was. And therefore it came to a different conclusion. And it was just a construct that orthodontists, it kind of makes things fry on the inside. There's smoke coming out of their ears when they think about this, because it goes against what we were taught. And this ability to look at an orthodoxy, evaluate it properly, and come to a different conclusion is not an easy thing for us humans to do. Look what we polarize around. And it's not just in orthodontics, although I can give you 5 or 6 examples of things we polarize around in orthodontics. But look at us as human beings polarizing around the colors red and blue and what they mean. I mean, it's hard to take a little bit, because the more we look, I'm going to get a little crazy here, but I'm telling you, just open your mind to this idea. What we've learned in the transition from Newtonian physics to quantum physics is that reality is really based on a yin and a yang principle. Light can either be a particle or it can be a wave. And if that can be true of light, it's going to be true of everything in the universe. Every atom can be seen as made of particles or waves. Every tissue, every molecule, every tissue, every cell has both wave and particle principles. We have to understand that we see things based on how we look at them. That's the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. If you want to look at light as a wave, just set up the right experiment. If you want to see it as a particle, you set up a different kind of experiment. But that doesn't mean both things aren't true. This is my.
I like that. Write that down. We see things how we look at them.
Yeah, that is a fundamental process of, concept in quantum mechanics and quantum physics. And you can look at things to your advantage, and use them in ways that are helpful. So as far as bringing this back down to earth, in terms of medicine, we have been very successful in using biomechanics and biochemistry to solve lots of problems for people, right? And the breadth and depth of the pharmaceutical industry and the surgical medical industries attest to the fact that we can solve a lot of problems. On the other hand, we know there are a whole lot of problems that are not being solved by biochemistry and biomechanics alone. And it's not really until we started opening our minds to the more Eastern ways of looking at things, which really were based on the bioenergetic capabilities of the body, that we started to see, you know what, there are some other ways of looking at the body. And some recent literature, in my mind, has started to reconcile them, that you can be both a biochemical being and a bioenergetic being, and they both influence each other. And there's no need to polarize over whether the body is just bioenergetic or just biochemical. You can see them both. Now, how I'm going to bring this down to facial growth and maxillary development, I haven't quite gotten there yet.
Bring it there.
But my mentors have. Gavin James has been after me for a long time to understand that we and because he's one of the big influencers in the ALF concept. And those of us that are doing ALF understand that we're dealing with the energetic part of the being. And he's been after me to come up with a way of expressing this in orthodontic terms that the orthodontists are going to understand. I don't know if any orthodontists are going to listen to this podcast, but I'm hoping that one will, and it will tickle her brain or his brain, and to thinking that maybe there is a little bit different way of looking at things. And it's not until we start dropping some of those orthodoxies that we're going to start seeing the bigger picture.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the ALF? Is that something that you do in your office?
Yeah, well, I'm going to say that between the ages of 3.5 and say 6 or 7, more than 80% of my cases are ALF and Myobrace or myofunctional therapy and craniosacral therapy. That's the triad.
Okay.
You know, craniosacral therapy, and that you're trying to address, as you said to me before, the child attached to the teeth. Looking at and the fascia really is both a mechanical construct, right? It is the biotensegrity support system of the body. And it also is an energetic component because collagen and water serve as a semiconductor, transmitting information up and down, storing information, just like our silicone chips do in our phones and our computers, which is an amazing thing. It blows my mind to think about that.
Yeah, don't even think
I'm gonna. I had some interesting thoughts about that too, as I was sitting at the chair yesterday. Wait a minute, I'll come back to that because I don't want to skip around too much. But looking at so that's craniosacral therapy, and then myofunctional therapy to address the soft tissue dysfunctions of the mouth. And in a sense, the ALF is really just a support system for those two things. The ALF really is a surrogate tongue, sitting up there in the palate, behind the lower teeth, really just making sure that cranial motion is encouraged to go more in the right direction than in the wrong direction, which is what the tongue will do.
Yeah.
And yeah, this will bring us right into tongue.
Yeah.
This is great. Yeah, because that's what I was going to say. The tongue really is, it is so powerful. It is so miraculous. And yet, as dentists, we may be taught about the 16 muscles in it, but that's about it. Other than how to keep it out of our damn way when we're trying to do our work on teeth. Right. And yet it's kind of the 600-pound gorilla, sitting there. You want me to show you some stuff about
let's see some of this troubled love story. This is from the orthodontist. And so
right. And when I did this lecture, I kind of went into it a little bit cold ahead of time, but it was for the Talk Tools group. And I just thought, well, they're all about tongue. Maybe I should be talking about tongue. And I started thinking about what the role of the tongue is in the mouth. So I'm going to confess, it's kind of off the top of my head based on things that I've read and whatnot. And we really need to do a little more vetting of some of the information because there is a lot about the tongue. But I think I've created sort of this good structure.
Yeah, I'd love to see it. And then I think it was in this presentation that you show twins. So you can show this later, but a really great twins. So you got to show that too.
The role of the tongue and function, according to the orthodontist. So number 1 is to get etched teeth wet. Number 2 is to push cotton rolls out of the floor of the mouth. 3 is to touch the band cement before it sets, to go in exactly the opposite direction you tell it to. And then 5, to get in between the occlusion when you're trying to close the case down. That's what was happening to me when I read Herman Ramirez's article. And trying to finish a case when the tongue is fighting you, people don't realize how strong the tongue can be. Braces are made of metal, but they're not nearly as strong as the tongue. And, as orthodontists, we try to throw everything in the kitchen sink at the tongue when it gets in our way. But frankly, we do it usually, or at least for me, I was only concerned with the tongue when it was preventing me from finishing a case, which is really not the right thing to do. You want to make friends with the tongue before the case starts so that the case can go easy. But here's what I came up with. So the role of the tongue and function according to the tongue. So, and we can talk about these as we go along. Do you want to?
Or you can just keep going.
Yeah. So to direct food and liquid from the lips to the teeth and to the throat. All right. I mean, I tried to look at this in as logical a way as I could. You know, we use our tongue for bringing things into the mouth and down into the gullet, and which is pretty amazing when you think about it. The fact that this is sort of this organ that's muscular organ that's only attached on one end, and you know, and it can manipulate in so many ways the things that we're eating and drinking and so forth. That's that, and who teaches you how to do that? And watching the tongue in other animals is amazing. It's really, without it, you're not going to survive, right? So very important. Number 2, to do the dance of speech, which is, I also think this is a pretty incredible thing that other animals have not had to learn how to do. And frankly, the only reason that our tongue can do this dance is because we stood up on 2 feet, we put our head on top of our shoulders and lengthened our neck and our see, other animals, they can only do that. Lengthened our neck and opened the back of our throat so that our soft okay, hold on. Just the mailman. Sorry about that.
That's funny.
To do the dance of speech required us to change the shape of our throat so we could push air up through our throat and then form it into different sounds with our tongue and you know, throat and all that. The fact that we learn this by imitation by and large, right? Speaking the language that those around us are speaking as we're growing up is a pretty incredible thing. And I know that, as you said, the speech and language pathology I guess in previous years, correct me if I'm wrong, were about making compensations when things weren't going right. But now,
previous years, a lot of people still teach that way. But I think when you understand normal function and why someone might need to make a compensation, then you could probably fix it versus continuing the compensation if it's possible.
Yeah. So what I say about myofunctional therapy is it's creating a better dance floor. You know, better underlayment, better posture, better like in athletics. Say you're playing tennis, if you're going to receive a serve, you need a good stance so that you can move in any direction. Yeah. Same with ballet. Same with golf. You know, every linebacker's got you know, taking a stance to be able to move whatever direction they need, and the tongue has to do the same. All right.
My mentor had said, Katha had said, hopefully I'm saying this correctly, but posture is the foundation of function, and every movement is determined by the posture with which it began and to which it returns.
Beautiful.
I know. I hope I said it right.
Right. And that's exactly how I you know, tell people about why just continuing on with speech therapy without correcting these underlying postural constructs is sometimes fraught with with risk there. To rest the palate and serve as a scaffold for the growing maxilla. So these are the concepts that I really first heard, I guess, really from Chris Farrel and John Flutter at the Myobrace Centers. And they got it from John Mew, who frankly is still being persecuted for saying such a simple thing. But really the tongue, if the tongue's resting on the roof of the mouth and and it can be there comfortably, John would say 6 to 8 hours a day, which is really not that much time out of a 24-hour day. About a third of the time, that the maxilla will have a better shape and it'll grow in a better direction, more forward, more broad, less downward, less collapse. And that's a pretty big role. I mean, this is where I spend a lot of time with kids that are young, from 0 to 10 years of age or more, really, but trying to get that going so that we can wind up with a decent maxilla. And this is really what the alpha's doing. One of the things the alpha's doing, just serving as that scaffold for the growing maxilla. Mm-hmm. 4, to usher in the erupting teeth. So I mean, humans grew up with straight teeth. They didn't need an orthodontist, for God's sakes, to have straight teeth. It was a natural phenomenon. And for some reason, that concept of a zone of equilibrium has been discarded. And I just don't know why. But when you have the tongue working in the proper way on the inside of the mouth, and the lips and cheeks and chin, frankly, and neck working well on the outside of the mouth, and there's a nice entry point for the teeth, and they're just following the path of least resistance, right? There are no genes showing where the tooth goes. In fact, I don't even know if we have a biochemical answer for why teeth erupt. I think there's probably more of an energetic answer that at least I have not heard yet. Why do top teeth come down and lower teeth go up? I mean, we've just considered it a mystery. And certainly not with a lot of power, but there is power. It does somehow, it just keeps going. But if it runs into an obstacle, it starts veering off course. Mm-hmm. And so, the obstacles are usually other teeth, and the other teeth are, they're trying to vie for space. They're playing musical chairs, essentially, trying to vie for inadequate space. That's how teeth get crooked. Mm-hmm. So the tongue, if it's acting properly, and then if swallowing doesn't require the facial muscles to compensate for a tongue that doesn't know what it's doing, then the teeth can come in straight. Number 5 is to stimulate cranial motion. So I heard Tasha Terzo speak to a group of osteopaths, no less, who really had no idea how powerful the tongue was in the development of the skull, and especially that gentle pressure that a properly placed tongue on the palate will give to the entire skull during a proper swallow, and stimulate and encourage proper cranial motion. Right? So every time the tongue pumps up against the palate, it serves to do the same thing that a craniosacral therapist or craniosteopath does when they put their fingers gently on the palate. And that pumping action helps the motion of cerebrospinal fluid in and around the brain, in and around the pituitary gland, and just so many things. And a lot of times I see kids that have their own compensations with thumb sucking, right? So thumb sucking is always a compensation for something. And what is it? Could be different things, but for the ones that have that thumb placed up on the palate, I suspect they're just compensating for the fact that their tongue is not doing that work. They don't know it, of course. It's just a a lucky thing that they found, but it gives them a certain amount of comfort to do it.
Mm-hmm.
6 as a rudder for the spine. And here's where that midline fascia comes in, because really the lingual frenum is really just the tip of the iceberg. What you see is only part of what's going on. The fascia, of course, it runs all the way through the middle of the tongue. It's that they call it the aponeurosis. That's the muscle connection, the fascial muscle connection for the two halves of the tongue, and that runs all the way down to the floor of the mouth and back to the spine. So and lower, as well, right? Because fascia is connected from head to toe. I think it's actually kind of nice to say from the tip of the tongue to the toe, because it is such an active part, and is influenced by fascia from the feet up, and influences fascia from the tip of the tongue down. And there are lots of cases where position of the tongue can be related to things like cervical rotations and scoliosis, and sacral motion problems and all that. So rudder for the spine. I mean, whoever thought of that? And yet the osteopaths have been telling that to us for a long time. As an electrical conduit. So here I'm speaking a little bit out of my depth, because I'm just learning some of this. I know there are many of us that understand these things far more than I do. But there are energy flows through the body. We now think that many of the meridians of Chinese medicine and acupuncture and the Ayurvedic energy flows, the chakra and so forth, that they correlate with the fascial system. And that would make perfect sense, because we really, in the West, we have ignored the fascia. And work by many, including the Stecco family in Italy, have really done a lot to elucidate just what the fascia is. I was surprised by this, and it's only just a few years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I read this article. Anatomists discovered new organ in the body. I go, what the hell are they talking about? And this was in Nature magazine, and it said the anatomists now have defined an organ called the interstitium, which is all that stuff that's in between all the other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what the fascia is. It wraps around every nerve, every vessel, every muscle bundle, every organ, connects everything, serves in our skin as that biotensegrity structure, and transmits energy and information along it, based on the fact that it's actually a functioning semiconductor.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the energy pathways runs right up through that major midline fascial train up into the tongue. And for it to continue, the tongue literally has to be plugged into the maxilla. So from a Chinese medicine point of view, the energy flows that go through the tongue go up, through up into the head through that connection. Sort of like a plug in a socket. Just put the tongue on the spot, and allow the energy to flow through. That was a big one for me, and I was just learning about that from the books by James Oshman. I'm going to have trouble with the title, but it's energy medicine for the healthcare practitioner, something like that. He's been writing about energy medicine, for quite some time, and takes a good long look at its history. It's wonderful. Really fascinating. It helped put a lot of these things into context for me, because when you're trained in Western medicine, all that stuff, all that energy stuff, all the energy healing and volmeters and acupuncture, it was all kind of woo-woo for us. But I think that at least some of the research that's being done in that is really starting to kind of elucidate, especially now that we understand what the fascia is, elucidate how this can be a real anatomical construct, and how it works. And again, when you start bringing in the concepts of quantum thinking and quantum biology into it, it really starts to make sense. I'm just so excited about what's going to happen in this current century, if we don't kill ourselves first, in what's going to happen in medicine. Really exciting stuff. As an airway dilator and a guardian. So this is the story I was going to tell you when it occurred to me before. I'm sitting at the chair yesterday, and I was working on a tooth. I was putting a little composite nib on a tooth to help hold in a brand new F. And I'm sitting there watching what the tongue is doing. And I start seeing the tongue as an independent organ. I mean, like an independent being. Like if you ask somebody to move their tongue to the right, the tongue moves to the left, as if to say, you can't tell me what to do. I may be anthropomorphizing a little bit, so forgive me, and maybe I've just been thinking about this. Maybe I'm just too tired, but I had my assistant take a video while I was working so we could watch the tongue. It literally was poking around this way and that way. It was going, all right, what did you put there? What is that? What is that? I don't want that there. No, all right. And then he goes to the other side.
I pictured like an eel, like in the mouth. Like
yeah, I know. And I was thinking, how was I going to be able to put two eyes and a nose on this tongue like they do in, I don't know, Instagram or Twitter, where you can put a hat on, like we were doing before. I wanted to put two eyes on this.
I think you will.
Tongue. Yeah.
If she videoed that, you're going to put a face on. And I'm anxious to see.
It'll be so funny. But that's how I look at it. It is like an independent organ. And I think of it as the troll sitting in front of the bridge. So you walk up to the bridge and the troll comes out and goes, "Who goes there? You are not allowed to cross this bridge unless you, I don't know, say the magic word. I can't remember the story, right?
Billy Goat Gruff.
That's right. That's the one.
I taught in a preschool. I remember that story. Yeah. So it's like guarding.
Exactly right. And the tongue is the guardian of the airway, at least the oral airway. And I do suggest and think that most gag reflexes are neural connections that are sensitized as guardians of the airway.
Oh yeah.
When the airway is in threat, that expelling anything that gets in the way is part of the tongue's job.
Mm-hmm.
When we see scalloping on the tongue, when we see anterior open bites, when we see so-called dental protrusion, I know that that's the tongue trying to get out of the way of the airway.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and so so all right, so this is where it gets even a little stranger, because in energy medicine, we're starting to see that, and not just energy medicine, in neurology, we understand that there are lots of neurons and stuff in the brain, and they have functions for processing both input and creating output and that kind of thing. And it's been long thought that we have similar functions in our gut, that the vagus nerve attaches to a pretty wide system of how do you say them, neurological groups. There's another name for it I can't bring up right now, of neural nets, such that, when we speak of this having a gut feeling,
Mm-hmm.
that there are literally energetic and emotional responses to things that are happening in our gut.
It's funny you say
Recently,
that. I just saw.
yeah.
Oh my gosh, this is really weird. Can you see me on the screen? Because all I can see is you. Can you see me?
No, I have
Okay.
to wait.
I just screenshotted
Now I
this.
can.
Okay, I just did a screenshot that I saw this on Facebook and I
Yeah,
screenshot and texted to my husband. Can you see what that says?
it's just coming out as white. No, I
Oh,
can't see it.
okay. It says gut feelings are guardian angels. And
Oh,
that's kind of weird because we're talking about the tongue, the guardian for the airway. Then we're talking about
yeah,
gut feeling is this energy level, right?
yeah,
It's protecting. I'm like, that's weird that you're talking about that. And I just was thinking about that yesterday when I saw
yeah.
that posted somewhere. Yes,
Right.
some internal, it's something else when you have a gut feeling about something. It's
Yeah,
like an energy response, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
interesting.
that and I learned that in Chinese medicine, the heart has a similar function.
Mm-hmm.
That the heart is thought to have, because it has strong neural nets, that it has a certain amount of neurological autonomy to it, that it's not just controlled by the brain
Mm-hmm.
entirely, that it has its own, also own sort of energetic component, at least in traditional Chinese
Mm-hmm.
medicine is thought to. And
Mm-hmm.
then I'm looking at the tongue and I'm going, oh my God, this is its own semi-independent organ of the body.
Mm-hmm.
And, you look at the homunculus that kind of illustrates how much brain material is devoted to each part of the body.
Mm-hmm.
The tongue is huge,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and so I'm kind of honoring the role of the tongue here, in that way. So uh, it is the guardian of the airway. And number 9 is kind of the cultural functions that the tongue supplies for enjoyment, like eating ice cream cones and whatever else you want to think of, Nicole. And then finally is to give the orthodontist something to do and laugh at them while they do it. So that was the crux of the lecture. And
Mm-hmm.
I went through some details, with each of those, but that was fun to do. I haven't really had the time to expand on it, but if anybody wants to take up that mantle, Nicole, that I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that could be a fun
Can you
project.
show what else did you show in that presentation? Can you show the twins? Is it in that one?
Um, I can show the twins.
I find that really interesting. I think it was maybe
Yeah,
towards the end.
The twins were one of many aha moments for me. That one came from Chris Farrel. He was treating two twins. Give me a second to find it here. And the fact that he allows me to show this is one of many gifts that that man has given me.
I think it was in that presentation, right? I can't remember.
Yeah. Maybe it was, but this one is
Okay.
this one's probably a little more complete.
Yeah, those are the boys.
Yeah.
Epigenetics.
Right. So, yeah, the power of epigenetics. So the thing about these boys is that they're twins, and I always ask, are they identical twins
Can
or
you zoom?
fraternal
Can you
twins?
push play so it's a full screen?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, and yeah, I don't want to blow the punchline, do I? So, and they are identical twins, and they're here about 15 years old, but here they are 4 years earlier. Now, isn't that amazing?
Mm-hmm.
Do they look like twins here?
Mm-mm.
No, not at all.
I mean,
And
even they look like different ages.
yeah,
Um, Even look at the eyes on the left. There's so much sclera showing. His
yep,
eyes are projecting forward significantly.
yep,
A lot of flattening underneath the eyes. Of course, we have the lip wedge posture mentalis strain.
yep,
I mean, even his right eye, so left from our view, but his right eye is lower than the left.
yep.
Um, it looks like he's flaring his nostrils out as well. So the nose is different shape. I'm trying to
Nicole,
look,
you get an A
disregarding the hair.
plus.
What'd you say?
You get an A plus. And
Okay.
and in our book, we call this craniofacial dystrophy.
Mhm.
And it is a distortion of the shape of the face due to functional factors, soft tissue, breathing issues. He did have severe allergies for some reason that his brother didn't have.
Mhm.
And so they grew up looking entirely different.
And I mean, the boy on the right, it's hard to tell, obviously, with colors and photographs, but he looks healthier, right?
Mm-hmm.
He looks fresh and healthy. And the boy on the left, he looks sick, right? Like he looks like,
Yeah,
obviously not breathing well. It doesn't look good. But then, yeah, and you wouldn't think they're twins, identical.
right. And if we look at this boy's picture, intraorally,
Oh gosh.
this is what we got.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh, is right.
And there you go. Does he have different genes than his brother? Was he a thumb sucker? Do you know?
I don't I don't know all the details
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
All I know is that his tongue certainly was not resting on his palate.
Yeah. And won't be able
And it wouldn't be able to get up there now. And this is illustrative because it shows how craniofacial dystrophy is at play in the structure of the maxilla in all three dimensions of
Yep.
space. Right. I kind of value how people are say, oh, I do airway, I do palate expansion all the time, but that's only one of three dimensions.
Mhm.
The maxilla is collapsing here. And those two incisors out there, the ones that everybody would call buck teeth, they're probably the only tooth that are halfway close to being where they should be.
Mhm.
Everything else has collapsed inward and downward and failed to grow forward.
Mhm.
And to hear an orthodontist say, "Oh yeah, this is a four bicuspid extraction space," that case that would not be unusual. You'd
Mhm.
hardly blame them for that in a way. And yet, what we know is that taking out teeth in a case like this, it'll line up the teeth, but it'll lock in the skeletal pattern forever.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, by paying attention to the soft tissue dysfunction and the breathing, and yes, it took a long time, and yes, it took cooperation, and yes, it's not guaranteed all the time, and yes, maybe the results aren't what you would think are perfect. This is what his teeth look like now. And go ahead, criticize the cuspid guidance or the plane of occlusion and blah, blah, blah. But what's really miraculous about this treatment is that his face became what it should have been all along.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And yes, this is an anecdotal story, but it falls into the category of if it happened, it's probably possible.
Yeah.
And to me was a major lesson of what good myofunctional airway related breathing, integrative treatment can do for a child.
Yeah.
Isn't that incredible?
Wow. I mean, that's just amazing. It gives me the chills. Look at his before picture.
Yeah.
And his after picture, but just he's healthier, which you can see that, but you can't see that, right? It's like a combination. You can see his face looks healthier, but where health wise, where was he and where would he have been had he not had correct treatment?
Right. That's exactly right. And I know where he would have been because for many, many years, I treated kids like that with, a lot of times was with extractions. Frankly, the amount that I did in extractions had been going down by the years since I got into practice. For my dad in the 1960s, he was extracting premolars in 2/3 of cases.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time 2008 rolled around for me, I was probably down to 5%, taking advantage of some of the newer the more thorough use of palate expansion at the time, some of the functional appliances that I was using, the advances in light wire mechanics and braces and all that, I was able to accomplish quite a bit. But and I was very proud of it, like correcting a class 2 malocclusion without extractions. I was very proud of that. I was distalizing upper molars, and I was able to pull back upper incisors to meet short lower jaws. And when I look back on that now, I realize that my treatment was just locking in whatever they had come in with. That it was completely ignoring what was making the face like this kid's face on the left.
Yeah.
And there they will be until somebody comes around to undo them. Thank you, Bill Hang, teaching us. And now I open up more extraction spaces than I create. It's very rare for me to create any at all.
Okay.
So I do have 2 cases in these past 14 years that I've had to take out some teeth.
So
and I do it after I do expansion.
Okay.
It's got to be really, it's got to be really bad for me to take out the tooth.
That's good to hear. So 2 cases in 14 years have you had to do extractions, and that's after you've already expanded. That's
and they're usually teenagers after a lot of growth is done, and there's usually some teeth that have preliminarily fallen out and molars have drifted forward. And
I have a question about, I noticed that the 12-year molars in most people are significantly outside, so more buccal than the rest of the teeth. And that seems like where the teeth should be. Why are those more exterior?
They're in the palatine bone.
Okay.
Which for some reason, is not quite as subject to collapse as the maxilla.
So what about on the lower arch?
The lower arch, it's a little bit of a crapshoot because I have had I've had a number of cases that I felt like I did a wonderful preemptive myofunctional growth pattern on, and got nice big, wide, beautiful arches. And then the second molars come into the lingual, and I go, oh,
So those are not,
now I have to do orthodontics after all.
I have to like look at my
Yeah.
teeth, but I feel like on upper and lower, the
Yeah.
molars are more out than the rest.
Well, you want, yeah, technically you want the upper first molars a little wider than the second molars, and frequently they are they are lingual to that.
Mm-hmm.
So some people do use the second molars as guidelines because their ability to come in buccal or lingual is a little bit constricted by the narrowness of the bone back there.
Mm-hmm.
So where they can come in, is a fairly good guideline.
Someone mentioned to me
To,
that also because they come in later, that they're less subject to the soft tissue dysfunction. Would that make sense? Like, they might come buccally.
Maybe there isn't a lot of soft tissue. There's not a lot of soft tissue function there. You've got
Mm-hmm.
the ramus of the mandible coming up, and the width of the mandible. I mean, it is influenceable a little bit, but being endochondral bone, um, it's not as subject to our influence or environmental influence as we would like.
Okay. Do you use RPE in your practice at all?
I do. The way I have sought to train myself, I have really tried to get a handle on all the different approaches that are out there. I guess I feel as a specialist, it's kind of incumbent upon me not to ignore anybody's contributions, to look at it all and be able to pick the pros and cons as I see them. And so, what I've found, speaking of yin and yang, I have 1 foot in the yin world and 1 foot in the yang world. Now, the yin world is biomimetics, meaning looking at what nature could do or would have done to help the face grow properly if we didn't step in and mess it up. I say we, both socially, things we do as a culture or a people, and then things that we do individually in terms of compensations and soft tissue dysfunctions, that kind of thing. And if you look at what used to be pre refinement of sugar, pre industrial foods, pre baby bottles, and the like, there is the biology. That's the genetics, if you want to say it that way. The genetics is for the face to grow properly, forward and broad, with plenty of room for the tongue, with plenty of room for 32 teeth, even beyond second molars and all that. And that's what we're trying to mimic.
Mm-hmm.
What situations create that? Well, that there comes the 4 goals of myofunctional therapy. Breathe through your nose, keep your lips together at rest, your tongue on the palate, and swallow without, just using your tongue, not your facial muscles. That's how a human face would grow. Of course, chewing food that requires chewing, breathing air that is clean. I mean, there's all those things. So if I have my preference, I feel like it's kinder to act toward the body in that way. I kind of, go along with what A.T. Still said 140 years ago, that the body has the wisdom to heal itself if only we remove the obstacles. And that's the way chiropractors and osteopaths have been thinking since that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to get in there and remove the obstacles. And
What about mm-hmm.
that doesn't require screws.
Okay, I was going to ask, like, in an adult, do you treat any adults?
Well, wait, let me get to the rest of that answer
Oh, sure.
um, because this is important for my yang foot,
Okay.
and that is um, a lot of the kids that are coming into me, they are really in distress. They are not breathing well. They are not sleeping well, and they are not behaving well. And, we know this from, say, those early studies of Karen Bonnick,
Mm.
that kids that are not breathing well at night, even if they're infants, even if the snoring episodes last only 6 months, that they're going to have a greater chance of having neurocognitive or attention deficit problems, hyperactivities by the time they're in first grade. They have a chance of losing 10 IQ points, which may not sound like a lot, but if you only have 80, that's a lot. And we have an obligation to help turn it around for these kids, and quickly. And so biomimetics really doesn't quite do it
Okay.
when a kid's in distress. And we
Mm.
need to help turn things around as quickly as possible. And the word rapid may not be rapid enough. I want to crank that bone apart so we can open the airway, make room for the tongue, get it out of the throat as soon as we can,
Okay.
and help mitigate the problem. So that's where I'm using, so that we call orthopedic remodeling.
Okay.
So in biomimetics, we're letting the body make the decisions about how it's going to grow and heal. In orthopedic remodeling, we are the ones that have the so-called superior knowledge, and I say that in humility because I don't really believe it. I would really not want to pry apart somebody's bones if I didn't have to,
Mm-hmm.
but frankly, I have to.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And all right, so now I'll answer this other question. And the older you get, the harder it is to have somebody grow well. And even by the time you get into your teens, most growth is done. And if you still have a lot of airway problems and flow limitation, you got to help somebody get out of that. So that's when we're starting to use these more invasive techniques, not only of palate expansion, but three-way expanders. Again, because the sagittal has to be, you have to take care of the sagittal just as much as you have to take care of the transverse, coming forward. And now we're using expanders that are attaching directly to the bone, so we get the best split of the bone possible.
Mm-hmm. How do you
And
get that sagittal growth non-surgically?
so, you push, you pull, you get the
In an
tongue
adult.
up there. Yeah, I mean it. Non-surgically, you push and pull. So you're standing from behind. You're leaning on the premaxilla. You're leaning on the teeth. You're advancing the teeth. You use a reverse pull face mask, and you hook it up to whatever you can hook onto the teeth, and you yank forward as hard and often as you can.
In an
Whatever the
adult.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you try.
Yeah.
I we have a surgical technique that can bolster the bone so that as you're spreading the teeth out, at least you don't spread them out past the limits of the periodontal attachment. You it's called, well, they call it surgically facilitated orthodontic treatment, but it's a corticotomy. You lift up the gums away from the bone, you score the bone deeply, you like wound it, and then you pack it with artificial bone, and you and sew down the gingiva again. And now what you've done is you've set up this tremendous healing phenomenon, which almost makes the bone not exactly jelly, but jelly like, where it can allow teeth to move at a fairly rapid rate
Hmm.
and in a direction far further than you otherwise would have been able to do safely.
Okay.
And there's that. We do the bone expansion, and really, when you come right down to it, doing what nature should have been done is the best way to do it. That is, bring both jaws forward in the face, which is, of course, is orthodontic surgery. But that's the object lesson there. If you're going to have to do 2 jaw surgery where you literally disarticulate the bones from the skull, bring them forward, and then lock them down in place with plates, why didn't you do it when the kid was 5?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's this is part of that concept of the Airway Timeline. Have you seen that? I mean, I kind of show that all the time, but it's such a useful construct.
I haven't seen that.
Let me bring it up for you, because this will be a good way to end our session today.
Yeah. This was at the APMD, actually.
Yeah, I often show this because it really, to me, this is the working construct that I find is so helpful. I kind of go backwards. This is from sleep disordered breathing to obstructive sleep apnea, and the few things we have of really getting people out of apnea, which is the air mask or mandibular advancement devices or Roto-Rooter in the throat, pulling out fat and tissue, which hurts like a mother, and then the 2 jaw surgery. But if you go backwards, we realize that these are not sleep problems at all. They're really breathing problems. It's just that we're more susceptible to the breathing problems at night, that the breathing problems are happening because the shape of our face is changing and the airway is changing shape. The airway is changing shape because the bones of the face are not developing the way they should. They're not developing the way they should because we have these soft tissue dysfunctions, which keep the mouth open, the tongue low, breathing through the mouth, eating soft food. And those are all compensations and parafunctions for the fact that we're living in a world that our body doesn't recognize anymore, because the food we eat, the stuff we drink, the air we breathe, the electrical environment, the fact that we're in chairs sitting in front of as we're speaking, laptops all day. These our bodies were not designed for all these things. And so you kind of have to work to undo the problems.
Yep.
So if you can mitigate the environmental stressors, which is really social action and big picture stuff, then maybe we don't have to get into the compensations so much. If we have to compensate, you just want to make sure they don't become habits. And because they're going to do destruction. And if you already have the habits, you try to make sure that the bones don't become distorted by taking care of the habits early enough. But if you're waiting till braces age when the face is already grown, now you're not only taking care of crooked teeth, but you have to take care of hampered breathing spaces. And the more we learn about hampered breathing, and it shouldn't have to be said, but it does have to be said, that poor breathing mechanics and a poor breathing pattern affect every system of the body, because we're not delivering oxygen as efficiently as we should. And that's even if there's plenty of oxygen in your blood. Right? It's just because of the biochemical changes of carbon dioxide and blood pH. We're altering the dissociation curve of delivering oxygen. The package is on the Amazon truck, but the Amazon truck's passing our house, so to speak. And then if you wait till the end of the line when it becomes sleep apnea, this happens after years of the nervous system giving up, trying to protect you while you're sleeping. And so this is what we teach at the Airway Collaborative. There are three domains that you have to look at. You have to look at structure and function and behavior. Structure meaning the anatomy of the airway from the tip of the nose to the bottom of the throat. Function meaning physiology, things that might make the airway, more clogged, mucus, inflammation, swelling, pressure changes, mucus, all kinds of things that make breathing harder in an airway. And then finally, behavior. And we know that if you don't change the behaviors, that you can't change the outcome. And that's where this bell curve thing comes in. And it's up to us at every stage along the way to parse out what's available to deal with structure and function and behavior. And that's where I think dentistry has to go in the 21st century.
That was great. I love that. That was such a great ending slide. I mean, that just brought it all together. That is perfect.
Yeah.
Exactly. Enough said. I mean, that is where it starts, where it ends up. We need to start from the beginning so we don't end up there.
And we really do know a lot. I complain about what I don't know, but we do know a lot, and certainly enough to get started, and certainly enough that everybody that treats children should be at least open to the idea of helping kids develop an optimal physiologic airway and breathing pattern. There's no excuse. If you're hanging on to that genetic bull, you got to let go. Just open your mind a little bit, and you'll see it's right there. And there's so much, and my practice is so busy.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be. Well, no, it should be, but I want it to be. But I also want that people shouldn't have to travel so far to get to me. It's just impractical. And there should be at least a few in every state, for God's sakes. I'm living next to New York City, 7 million people, and there are only 3 dentists that are doing this work in the city.
It should be treating towards airway occlusion,
but whole body health,
cosmetic occlusion, and whole body health. Well, your practice is probably really busy. There's not too many airway focused practitioners, it sounds like, but the trend, it's changing. I think people are realizing it's just coming around. So I guess change takes time. And for a lot of people, it's not until you see your own children suffer that you realize, and then you realize, like as in my case, oh, it's not just my kids, it was me and my husband. We have the same problems too. And then you start noticing it everywhere. And that kind of probably sparks change for a lot of people too.
Yeah. And shouldn't we give a shout out to the AAPMD? Nicole, I had such a good time with you and Kale and everybody there. People of like mind that are working together to make a difference. And here I want to do one more shout out before we stop, because this has also become sort of a model of my thinking. There was a woman who had 2 kids that were highly allergic. The kind that they couldn't sit next to somebody eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich at school. And she was able to work them out of it by taking a functional medicine approach, collaborative approach, throwing everything in the kitchen sink sort of at the kids, and work them out of the allergy piece. And she started a project called Documenting Hope. Her name is Beth Lambert, and she has picked up this mantle on behalf of children, in this generation, these generations, in the knowledge that they are quickly being overcome by chronic non-communicable diseases of Western civilization. And that unless we pick up the mantle for helping kids out of these problems, their life expectancy and their quality of life is going to be diminished severely.
Mm-hmm.
And so the things that we are doing are not just straightening teeth and not just getting good oral rest posture for the tongue. We are literally helping turn around the health and well-being of a generation of children. And I really encourage everybody to start thinking that way. Go look at their website, Documenting Hope. They have clinical trials now. One of my mentors, Jim Bronson, is in the clinical team down in Virginia. They're starting their first 2 cases. I hope to become part of this clinical trial thing. I'm trying to make a case for my team up in North Jersey. Other people are going to be needed.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody in the earshot, if you feel like you have a good clinical team that can handle these things, I'll put you in touch with Beth, because we need to like that case of the twins that you loved.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be able to document that on several cases to show that if this happened, it's probably possible. Now, how are we going to do it for everybody?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, because watch out, global warming. We got bigger threats.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like you were saying, overall health, it's like Kevin Boyd says, the health span. So people are living longer, but less
Right.
healthy. And the
Less
work
health.
we're doing with these children at a young age is increasing the health span.
Yeah.
Like those twins, like, I mean, whoever treated that one child probably increased his quality of life, his health, everything. That those effects will only be estimated as to what would have been, so diabetes, high blood pressure, there could have been so many issues that child could have had as an adult that were probably prevented just by fixing the structural functional components, breathing. So I feel like you said, the APMD, I know you're the one that said it's like a love fest, because everybody there has the same passion, that it's like your heart is in it. There's a deeper meaning for everyone, and you feel it when you go to those conferences. So
that place filled my heart.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's like a rejuvenation. It's like coming home again. Like, it's like your family that, half the people I never met before, but it's like, oh, you're my tribe, right? My Airway tribe. It's like, being around people who have the same motivation. It's not financial motivation for most of these people. It's for helping human beings of all ages. But when we get to these children, we get to them young, you could really make some major changes.
Yeah, we certainly hope so.
So thank you for all you do.
You're welcome.
You for spending so much time on a Friday educating. I can't wait to share this with everybody. It was awesome. Great. It was so great.
Good. I'll pass it around so they watch this one, but also all your other episodes. They must be great.
Thank you so much. I hope you have a great weekend, and thank you for all you do. It's so appreciated. All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.